Hey everybody, how are you doing? Welcome to the Starseeds and Lightworkers Collective. My name is Crystal, and today we have an amazing presentation to be given by Miss Elisha Mancini Caster, and she's going to be talking about transpersonal psychology and many of the aspects of psychology and how that intersects with many different studies, if you will. And so we're going to be looking into that. But just before we get started, I just want to just announce we have a video that we are going to be promoting. It's going to be by Luke Blue Eagle. He is a Native American shaman, and he has done a number of videos with us in the past, and he is going to be doing we're going to be posting his video on June 21st, which is coinciding with Canada's Indigenous holiday. So really check that out. The topic of his video coming up, it will be finding your inner strength. So I think it's going to be really interesting. And if you're a fan of Native American information and knowledge and culture, I think you'll find that video very, very interesting. So check that out on June 21st. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Miss Elisha Mancini Caster, and she'll be talking to us today about transpersonal psychology. So hi, Elisha, how are you doing?
I'm great, Crystal. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for being with us today. And so for people who don't know you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Of course. My name is Elisha Mancini Caster. I am a psychic medium, an Akashic record practitioner, and an energy healer. I've done a lot of counseling. I have a bachelor's degree in counseling psychology and a master's in transpersonal psychology. And I also hold many certifications. I'm an NLP life coach, trauma coach, Reiki master, hypnotist, and timeline regression specialist.
Wow.
So I'm obsessed with human consciousness.
I guess you think?
Yeah.
We have to make sure that we have you come back to talk about a lot of different things, especially about the last one you just mentioned here, which was about is it about Akashic records, or is it about
Timeline regression.
timeline regression? Yeah. What is that?
Well, timeline regression takes the individual back into their timeline. So anything that has happened, a lot of times we have trauma that has happened or taken place in childhood or just in our past. And timeline regression therapy helps us go back and review what has happened. And we go through a healing process with that. And it's a beautiful process. I did it for a lot of years, mostly that and energy healing for quite a few years. It was really helpful, and we see really good results.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think that a lot of people are finding a lot of different modalities to help them with what they're dealing with. So you have a lot of people that are turning to Reiki, and like you said, past life regression and all that. So I think that it's that's another tool in the toolkit, right? That people can use to advance and to work on their own personal journey and spiritual journey. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So for today, we are going to be talking about transpersonal psychology. So before we get into the the presentation, can you just give people who don't have a background in psychology or may not know what exactly is transpersonal psychology, like in a nutshell?
Well, sure. Well, we can look at the term
Okay.
transpersonal. So trans, the beginning, means beyond, and personal means self. So it's really about moving beyond self or beyond ego. So transpersonal psychology it's kind of like an umbrella term, really. I mean, it's an umbrella of a lot of different things we'll get into in the presentation. But well, how about before we begin the presentation, I would love to preface this journey through transpersonal psychology
Sure.
with the structure of the hero's journey, if that's okay.
Okay, great. No problem. Absolutely. And is that the hero's journey with like Joseph Campbell, if I'm not mistaken?
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
This will help explain the spiritual path, which has to do with the purpose of transpersonal psychology. A lot of people define transpersonal psychology as spiritual psychology, but that's really only an aspect of it.
Okay.
So I like to say, really, it's the purpose of it. But before we get into the ins and outs of transpersonal psychology, let's just take a look at the hero's journey, and we'll just watch this 3-minute short video on the hero's journey. And I'm sure many of you, your viewers, will see the similarities of the spiritual path as it unfolded for them.
Okay. Okay, great. So let's just do that. Let me just cue that up here. And all right, let's do it.
Great.
What do Harry Potter, Katniss Everdeen, and Frodo all have in common with the heroes of ancient myths? What if I told you they are all variants of the same hero? Do you believe that? Joseph Campbell did. He studied myths from all over the world and published a book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces, retelling dozens of stories and explaining how each represents the monomyth, or hero's journey. So, what is the hero's journey? Think of it as a cycle. The journey begins and ends in the hero's ordinary world, but the quest passes through an unfamiliar, special world. Along the way, there are some key events. Think about your favorite book or movie. Does it follow this pattern? Status quo, that's where we start. 1 o'clock, call to adventure. The hero receives a mysterious message, an invitation, a challenge. 2 o'clock, assistance. The hero needs some help, probably from someone older, wiser. 3 o'clock, departure. The hero crosses the threshold from his normal, safe home and enters the special world and adventure. We're not in Kansas anymore. 4 o'clock, trials. Being a hero is hard work. Our hero solves a riddle, slays a monster, escapes from a trap. 5 o'clock, approach. It's time to face the biggest ordeal, the hero's worst fear. 6 o'clock, crisis. This is the hero's darkest hour. He faces death and possibly even dies, only to be reborn. 7 o'clock, treasure. As a result, the hero claims some treasure, special recognition, or power. 8 o'clock, result. This can vary between stories. Do the monsters bow down before the hero, or do they chase him as he flees from the special world? 9 o'clock, return. After all that adventure, the hero returns to his ordinary world. 10 o'clock, new life. This quest has changed the hero. He has outgrown his old life. 11 o'clock, resolution. All the tangled plot lines get straightened out. 12 o'clock, status quo, but upgraded to a new level. Nothing is quite the same once you're a hero. Many popular books and movies follow this ancient formula pretty closely. But let's see how well The Hunger Games fits the hero's journey template. When does Katniss Everdeen hear a call to adventure that gets the story moving? When her sister's name is called from the lottery. How about assistance? Is anyone going to help her on her adventure? Hey, Mitch. What about departure? Does she leave her ordinary world? She gets on a train to the capital. Okay, so you get the idea. What do you have in common with Harry Potter, Katniss Everdeen, and Frodo?
So Joseph Campbell designed the structure of the hero's journey because of the patterns he began to notice during his incredibly vast research in mythology. And in fact, it's always a fun little side note. Joseph Campbell was really good friends with George Lucas.
Oh.
And I know,
Yeah.
George Lucas, he talks a lot about it, making the connection in the Star Wars trilogy to the hero's journey. So, and actually when you search for other movies that are based on heroes and villains, it really follows the stages of the hero's journey pretty perfectly. Yeah.
Okay, great. And so basically when we're looking at this, is this how we then move on in for example, into our own personal hero's journey? Is that how this works?
That's exactly how it works. So even when I went to California And my opening seminar, when I got my master's in transpersonal psychology, we talked a lot about the hero's journey. So the hero's journey kind of mimics the spiritual path. There's 12 stages. It's a process of awakening. And so, yeah, a lot of us go through that. So a lot of people that work in the transpersonal psychology field, we kind of follow this theme from mythology that it's just a natural, normal part of human development.
Okay, great. So let's sort of get into the presentation. I think we're ready to go with that. And you can let us know, you can sort of guide us through that. All right. So,
Sure.
yeah. So let's get to that. So on our
Great.
first slide.
So I wanted to share this presentation about transpersonal psychology by taking you through this hero's journey with transpersonal psychology, because this is really an evolutionary process. So even with transpersonal psychology, it went through its own awakening. So to look deeper into a more definitive term with transpersonal psychology, we could say it's the branch of psychology that studies the full spectrum of human experience. So it would include peak experiences, altered states of consciousness, spiritual development, and higher states of awareness. All of it aiming to understand and support personal growth and self-realization. It's really just and the integration of the spiritual dimension into our everyday life.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right. And so on our next slide here, so we're talking about the early 20th century. Is that where we're headed next?
Well, yes, let's go to the very first stage.
Okay.
So it'll be ordinary world. So there we go. Early
Okay.
20th century. Yes. So in the early 20th century, the two forms of psychology that were popular at the time were psychoanalysis and behaviorism. So the world of psychology viewed people that had mental illness. They observed them, they diagnosed them, and then they repressed the symptoms that were labeled as not good. And during this time, the electroshock therapy treatments were a normal practice. So Stan Groff, who we'll get into in a little while, he speaks about when he had to administer these treatments when he was a medical student. And then in his first few years of practice, it was just a common practice with people diagnosed with schizophrenia or a lot of mental illness, really. And they also used to practice like insulin-induced comas. And it's just a really unfortunate, that's just how we viewed psychology. It was just it was viewed as something to control, not something to really work through. So metaphysics and spirituality didn't really have a place in psychology then.
Okay. And so at that time, we are then looking at the early stages. And it's interesting because we often hear, especially when you look at people who were, for example, in institutions, some of the scary stuff that was going on and you know, comas and all that kind of shock therapy. And I recently heard about how people are doing stuff with the eyes, like they were putting needles or all kind of craziness in people's eyes. So that was kind of scary. I'm so glad we're out of the dark ages. No?
Oh my gosh. Can you imagine? Well, and it traumatized a lot of those people, professionals in the field. Yeah, they had to administer that.
Yeah, that's pretty gross. So, would you say that now we're in a new stage now where we're going to start putting the spiritual together with the psychology?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we're definitely in a space now. I think there's a huge awakening. We're moving into the fifth dimension. I think a lot of people are becoming aware of the importance of spirituality in psychology. So yes, it's growing for sure.
Okay, great. Okay,
Yeah.
shall we move on?
Let's go to stage 2.
Okay, great.
So stage 2 in the hero's journey is the call to adventure. So this really happened because of the of the effects of what was happening in hospitals and how people were dealing with patients. And I think the question that popped up for people that really just came alive in people that were working in this way is what lies beyond the ego. So here in this slide, we have a picture of Anthony Sudich and Abraham Maslow. So Sudich is often called the Stephen Hawking of psychology. He was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis as a small child. And by the time he was 18, he was paralyzed from the neck down. But as far as the world of psychology, he was brilliant. His door was always swinging. People were always going to see him. He was just very popular. And then next to him, we have Abraham Maslow. And he was one of the first psychologists to really stress the importance of viewing positive qualities in people instead of their symptoms. So he went on actually to develop the hierarchy of needs, which you can see in that picture there.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Can we go through that actually? Like just sort of like look at some of the needs?
oh, sure. Well, and it's awesome too, because the pillar on the height, well, let me go through them from the bottom. So as the pillar, as we rise in the pillar and we establish each layer, we move naturally into the next state. So this is how the spiritual path kind of works for us. So as soon as we go through the physiological needs, we start to be able to move into the safety needs. So one has to be established, then we move into the safety needs, and then we move on to belonging, self-esteem, and then into self-actualization. And it's awesome because it doesn't really stop there. I think what was happening to Abraham Maslow after he developed the hierarchy of needs was that he recognized as soon as you get to the top of the hierarchy, there is more that we kind of develop into, we get access to. So it was really a profound experience for him, but then also one, and he kind of worked in the way of when he would figure something out, he knew that he was at the edge of it, and then he had to continue on. So he just kept expanding his knowledge on and on. So as soon as we develop that self-actualization, which I say it like it's easy, but it's not. Self-actualization is really the process of recognizing and fulfilling one's fullest potential by becoming the most authentic and creative, capable version of who we are.
Yeah. It's interesting because I know that when we were watching the video, it was cute, and I'm very familiar with Joseph Campbell, and I remember Joseph Campbell doing an analysis of Star Wars and how Star Wars is a part of the hero's journey. And so we sort of see it from the hero's journey in terms of like, okay, like Star Wars, he leaves his home, and then he has the, Obi-Wan, who's the wise old man, and helps him out. He inevitably meets his father, and we all know the story. We've all been there. But in terms of how we could sort of take that template and put it on top of a personal journey, in some ways, and I mean, maybe you could sort of, help me to expand this, but when we start off as being who we are. We grow up as kids. Sometimes we have a bit of trauma, and we sort of get through it, and we do our best to sort of get through life. But then at some point we have what is called, I guess, the journey into the darkness of the soul, like the dark night of the soul. Would you put that as the same aspect of going through the hero's journey? Like you have to go through the dark night of the soul in order to come out and to be a different version of yourself. Would you make that sort of comparison?
Absolutely. I think when Joseph Campbell was talking about Star Wars, anytime I've ever heard him talk about Star Wars, he's talking specifically about the hero's journey. So in the hero's journey, some pictures or images of the actual journey, it shows it's split almost in half. Maybe the top is a little smaller, but we have the ordinary world at the top, the seen world. And then as we continue down the cycle, just like like a clock, we go through stages that are in the unseen world. And at the very bottom of that is when we hit that dark night of the soul. And it's very pronounced. You can see it in the movies, the Star Wars.
Yeah.
So absolutely, that is what takes place. And transpersonal psychology really kind of cradles that pattern. And so when you work with someone that is educated in transpersonal psychology, they know how to take you through that cycle and recognize the stages of where you are and kind of help to nudge you along into the next stage so that you can, move through it. Because some people, as you know, with the dark night of the soul, especially, people can spend years there.
Yeah.
Go through all kinds of therapies. And I don't know how many clients I've had that have been diagnosed with bipolar or schizophrenia. And once we start working through the spiritual path, they can kind of shed off those diagnoses. Now, I think some people are truly, they are diagnosed correctly. But oftentimes, usually when people find their way to me, it's because something inside of them is telling them that they need more guidance.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think for a lot of people here, often when I am speaking with people or I'm getting emails and stuff like that, I often hear a very common theme, and people will say, you know what, I'm so glad I found your group, or I'm so glad that this is happening because I thought I was crazy, but, and so they go through this whole thing about how this has happened to them or that has happened to them. And you've seen some of the guests that we've had on the show who have been through a real nightmarish, dark night of the soul. I mean, and they are trying their best to work through it. And I would say that right now, more than ever, if we had had this presentation, I think 20, 25 years ago, I mean, yes, I'm sure you would have had your number of clients and all that, and people would have been much more along, how should I say, the more standard route of psychology. But I'd say in the last 5 years, especially with the shift happening on the planet, so many more people are like, pop, 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 like everybody's sort of going through this thing all at once. Everybody's really sort of like, going through this, and it's not, and when I say dark night of the soul, when we say dark night of the soul, it doesn't have to be negative. It just means that you have to, for lack of a better term, face your shit. I mean, let's be honest. Like I'm not trying to sugarcoat it, but like you have to face it, especially if you've been through trauma or anything. You have to face your shit so that you can, at that point, move on. You know what I mean?
100%.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do you finally get, I mean, like you said, people will figure out and say, okay, you know what? I think that maybe something it needs to be done. But what are you looking at to see whether someone is really correctly diagnosed as opposed to someone who is just like, they're lost and they're looking for a way out? What are the tools that you're using at this point?
Well, transpersonal psychology is when you're working in this field, you're always helping the individual try to unravel what has been confusing for them. So it's really about an unveiling. Okay. So I'm a question asker. I have a million questions, but the questions help to slowly let go of what they haven't been able to look at, or what they haven't been able to see from a clear lens. I think so many people come and it's, well, I've tried this, and they're exhausted. And the perspective of just asking questions and having to answer questions that are different from questions that they've heard before from doctors or psychologists kind of helps me really know whether or not they're whether or not I can support them, or whether or not they've, and sometimes too, it's collaborative. So sometimes I've worked with people that are bipolar, and after several years, they're able to get off their medication. And that's, their doctor doing that.
Yeah.
I would never tell anyone to do that, but it's just slowly that they are able to manage the symptoms that have been such a struggle. and they've been able to just come into balance with their self, but they do all develop a spiritual connection to who they are. So I think a lot of times that is lacking. So people will come and they'll want me to fix it, and you can tell they've been through practitioners or doctors that have looked at the way they feel as a quick fix. Let's figure out how to fix this. And then slowly we start to, go deep into what is really affecting their behavior and the symptoms that they're having.
Yeah.
And slowly it just unravels. And
Yeah.
yeah,
But you know what though, and I've said it on the show a couple of times, is that and first of all, I just want to sort of put a bit of disclaimer here. People, if you're going through something, get a doctor's diagnosis first. I mean, it doesn't mean that you can't use the spiritual aspect, but I really feel that people need to be responsible and make sure that they get the proper care from their care provider. So I just want to sort of put that out there.
absolutely.
But moving forward though, at the same time, I've often said it on the show, and that sort of dovetails into my next question, is that sometimes I feel, especially when people are, let's say, for example, schizophrenic or all these other things, I sometimes feel that it's because they're open to different levels. And we've had and I'm sure if some of you have seen on our show a couple of weeks ago, we had Rogue Yogi who was talking about her experiences, about how she was able to see all different types of things. It's because she was so open to many of the different levels of consciousness that in this world, in this 3D matrix, it's seen as you are crazy, or you have problems and this and that. And and it doesn't mean that I'm not taking it seriously, but what do you feel about the idea that maybe some of what people are hearing and seeing and all that might be related to the fact that, especially now with everybody sort of coming online, as it were, how does that relate to people being, let's say, more clairaudient or more claircognizant or clair this, that? Where does some of that fall in, especially since you have the psychology background, and you also have the spiritual background? How do you see that?
Great question. Oftentimes when people go through trauma, especially at a young age, we have this ability of drifting out of our body so that we don't experience the full weight of the trauma. And that's a real gift for especially children that suffer, or anyone that's gone through a really difficult traumatic experience. So we have this ability to kind of let go of the physical body and drift above that. Because of that, we have the ability, when we're drifting out of our body, we're drifting into another dimension of reality. Sometimes we remember seeing things from that place. I remember I had a lot of trauma when I was younger, so I'll just give myself as an example here. And I remember drifting out of my bed and looking down at my body and being able to see my body. And I remember even looking into the space around me, and I could see the dust particles from the sun coming in the window. So it's this really strong, profound memory. And with that, I was also a child that had to deal with then being able to sense spirit all around me in my room at night. I was, terrified of all of the presence that I could sense and feel. And because of the traumatic experience and having the gift of being able to do that, that's what happens. So I think I'm getting a little bit of feedback. Wait,
Yeah,
okay.
somebody have I think on your side, maybe somebody turned it up or something. Okay.
I
Yeah.
think it stopped.
Okay, there you go.
But yeah, so we have this ability, and what ends up happening a lot of times with children, when they don't know how to turn that off, and sometimes puberty will teach us how to turn that off. Sometimes puberty will amp that up. It just depends on the person. And so then, yes, they're dealing with this being wide open. So sometimes people will come to me and they'll say, I can feel everything. They've avoided crowds their whole life. They've avoided certain people. They have a hard time holding down a job. I mean, there's
Yeah.
a huge variety of things that happen.
Yeah.
And they have to kind of learn how we go through a process of being able to tune back into the self so that we can slowly start to shut off
Yeah.
the outside world and let go of all of the
Yeah.
awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. And I resonate with that because I also had a lot of trauma growing up as well. And it's funny because if you look at most of the people that have spoken on this show, and yourself, and actually last weekend we had Ross Place, who came in and started was speaking about angels and some of this trauma that she had gone through, and she also learned how to sort of shut it all off. And I know in my own instance, I did a lot of emotion code, body code, and I learned to really shut and to recalibrate, because especially, it was weird because especially during my cycle I would got really 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 sensitive, and I would like I would get everything. I was freaking out. And so it's interesting how that, if I could say personally, that was my biggest sort of journey in, and the dark night of the soul is learning how to finally shut it all out and to keep it out, because if not I was going to just really lose my mind. And I can think sometimes I think that's what's also happening to some people who unfortunately leave this earth plane too quickly, because they can't handle some of the stuff that's going on. It's pretty sad. I don't know.
Absolutely. I also think that we see this a lot of times too, with what we label as learning disabilities, but learning differences.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I'm the oh, we have a black cat in here. I have cats that come into my apartment. But one of the things that I definitely would say is that all this ADHD, all this, I personally, I think that it's really a lot of people that are just, it's the shift. It's a part of, we're learning how to learn differently. The Victorian 19th century, bricks and mortar books and all that, that is really going the way of the dodo. And we are, our brains are upgrading because we have to get information in a different way. Yes, we can still read. I can read, I can see videos, all that. But if I feel that a lot of the information is coming, and so kids are not learning in the same way. And so in a 3D matrix, we look at that and say, oh, but this person has this or this person has that. It's just because they're learning differently. I don't know.
Which is perfect.
Yeah.
Really. Because, sometimes you'll see in the spiritual community, I've sat in a lot of mediumship development classes in my career. And sometimes you'll see people come in and they'll be, it'll be two sides of the spectrum a lot of times. You'll see the person that maybe has the ADHD struggle and has that complicated, it's just hard for them to get into the physical body enough.
Exactly.
Because they don't want to go all the way back in. And then you'll have the other side where people say, I can't let go, I can't see, I can't feel, I can't step into my mediumship, because we're all mediums, but they have a hard time really stepping into the unseen. And both of those can be trauma.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So let's sort of move on now. And so we had a situation where people answer the call. Now, what happens when people, for example, refuse the call and they don't want to go through it? Let's sort of talk about that now.
Sure. We can talk about, if we look at, we can talk about how people experience the refusal of the call, and then we'll talk about transpersonal psychology and kind of how that developed. Because there was a refusal of the call for psychology, really going through that process. But I think a lot of times people will refuse the call because it's unpredictable. And we really are set up in our society to go through a process of where we do something, we do 1, 2, 3. We know that this is what's going to come after that. We kind of have this promise of how our world will unfold if we follow these steps. And so people refuse the call of spirituality because it's this unseen world. They're afraid to take that leap. And I remember feeling that way when, I got my bachelor's in counseling psychology, and I was all set up to go get my master's in social work. So it was just a natural part of what I was going to do because I knew where that would take me. But I actually started my degree, and in my first round of classes, I had to break away. So I couldn't refuse the call, but I had to step into making, the mistake which was perfect to do. And then I was able to recognize, actually, I have to take the leap. And I think sometimes you feel that way, not all the time. Sometimes that refusal comes because people don't want to be outed by their communities, or they don't want to let go of friendships. They're afraid of, being seen as crazy. I mean, that's really so many people that, sit in a chair across from me. That is the story. I don't want to lose my friends. I'm afraid we're starting to not have things in common anymore. We don't really know what to talk about anymore. There's this depth of presence that's coming over them, and they're afraid to go deep because they don't want to lose all of what they've built their whole life.
Yeah. But you know what, though? Going back to the video that we watched, that's a
Mhm.
part of going through the hero's journey and then coming out. Yeah, you're pretty more or less the same, but you now have changed. You're the same physical person, but you're changed. You've sort of grown. And one of the things that I've learned in spirituality, in my own research, is that you are going to inevitably use some of these people because you're moving on to a different level and you're moving forward. And I'm not trying to say, oh, look at me, I'm great. No, it's about the fact that you have decided, and that's where it comes in with the refusal of the call. Some people refusing it. Let's be honest. You're going to
Oh,
meet
yeah.
people in the office, you're going to meet people here and there who have refused the call and who are not looking to grow, who are not looking to change or to become different, and so they want to stay in the same 3D matrix, right? And then you have other people who have, what, I faced it, I've had the trauma, I've done this, and now I've come out the other side and I'm a different person. You cannot, even if you're looking at it from a vibrational level, you cannot have two things that are not vibrating in the same way. You want to expand on that just a bit, especially from your own research?
Oh, yes. People will talk themselves. We're amazing. Our imaginations are amazing. So many people will talk themselves into staying the course. And a lot of people too, I think, and, kind of getting back into the ADHD thing a little bit, people that come into these gifts at a young age and don't know what to do with that. They feel like they've lived this life that has been all over the place
Yeah.
because it's not as calculated as other people. And so then they don't want to let go of the path because to them that feels like this other huge failure in their life. They're going to fail once again by letting go of this path of predictability, and everyone's finally happy they're on this right path and they've been doing the right thing all this time. Sometimes those are the hardest people to support into the awareness of the shift that they need to make because they just don't want to let go and feel like a failure. And to accept the call is to really take a leap of faith, and there is no guarantee, and we have to be able to find the beauty in that.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what, though? And I was want to sort of add to that, though, is that you can say, okay, you're on a path and you've answered the call and all that. And there's also the fact that, you know what, though, especially when you're working in an office, I cannot choose the people that I work with. This is what it is. There you go. But at the same time, I'm also seeing that in a way, there's a certain compassion in a way that comes out in me because I say to myself, they're doing their best that they can. They are at a certain point in the path. And there's also a level where you cannot judge either. I don't want to judge them and say, well, you're not doing it along my path, so therefore you're stupid. No, it's, I have to sort of turn around and say, you know what? I realize that that's what they are. And that's fine. And I don't want to sort of come across as saying, well, you have to be two-faced and you have to be this and that. But, I know that I can sort of be kind and friendly with this person that I work with. And fine, maybe these are not the kind of deep conversations I'm going to have with this person. But you know what, though? We're able to work together and I'm able to, have my job and not have to have everybody around me being on the same path. You know what I mean? Like you have to also learn how to be flexible and malleable and work your way through it. You know what I mean?
I absolutely know what you mean. I think that is when it is so important to to really make sure and support yourself in finding other people that are also going through what you're going through so that you have that support system. So that, yes, we do have to recognize that there's going to be a large percentage of our life spent with people that aren't at the same place in their hero's journey as you are. And so it is important to have patience and really everything that you're talking about, having that patience and being able to be around them in a positive way is support for their journey. And so I think it becomes contagious as we really walk this spiritual path and go through our own hero's journey. We really start to, and you can drop little clues here and there.
Yeah.
So eventually, if those people do start to have their own little awakening, they'll remember. Their intuition will cause them to remember something you said or the way you made them feel, and they'll come back to you. I've had so many people say, I just knew there was something different about you when I saw you.
Yeah.
And they had no idea that I was, but I just worked with so many people, and you just get to this place, with practice. I mean, it's all practice where you get to a place of non-judgment, and I am not perfect. I have my own human, I want to be human and go through my own lessons, and I'm, I still pull weeds all the time. And so it's okay. It's important not to beat ourselves up because we shouldn't expect perfection no matter where journey. So
yeah, exactly. But you know what though, it's also, and that's a big problem, and that's one of the biggest problems with the 3D matrix, is that there's this idea that there's this perfection out there. And it's funny, you mentioned something about people who are going through some of these changes are saying, well, it's another failed job, or it's another failed romance, or it's another failed this, that, the other. And one of the things that I've noticed is that you go through life thinking, that person had it so perfect, or that person had it this and that. And then you meet up with these people again later on in life, or you find out from somebody else, oh my God, that one, oh my God, there was this and that going on behind the scenes and everything. And it's not about a gossip. It's about the fact that here you are thinking that they have it so perfect. And there is no perfection, and they're going through all this hell, and just like everybody else, everybody's going through hell, their own hell. And yet, when you hear those stories, it's like, what? Okay, so I'm not some weird thing floating out in space. Like, I mean, I'm like everybody else. I have my issues. I have also weeds to pull as well, and I catch myself, but like we all do. And so I think one of the first things about this whole journey is don't expect perfection, and don't expect that you're going to sort of dance onto the stage with like perfect, I don't know what,
Absolutely. And we all do it to ourselves.
Yeah.
We all do it at different times, and we just expect this performance. You're right. It's like a stage, and we just expect that we will act this way, and that everything will, but it goes back to that predictability. We're kind of trained into that, and then we have to learn how to let go of that. But I think the truth is, when you really look at the depth of transpersonal psychology, and even just when you're thinking about awakening, the spiritual aspect of awakening in the human body on the earth plane, with all of the elements affecting us on all of these different levels, and we've got all of this multidimensionality. I mean, we are channeling from all different kinds of dimensions now as humans. And so we really did come to the earth plane to not be perfect, and to have all of these wild experiences. My spiritual teacher used to say this all the time, and I just love it. She used to talk about the spirit world, and I started to see it as I did readings over the years. So many people think that they'll say, you'll often hear people say, well, this is my last time on the earth plane. And my teacher would say, whenever anybody says that, chances are pretty good that papers are already being written up due to come back.
Exactly. Not so fast.
Yeah, we can't reach perfection. We came here to experience what it's like to be this spiritual being in this physical body. And it's an honor. We get so excited to do it and to come here. And so this spiritual journey isn't all rigor and difficult times. It's also just the beauty in recognizing that we came here for this to be messy.
Yeah.
And the way we deal with the messiness is the beauty of the unfoldment. And really where transpersonal psychology, that umbrella of transpersonal psychology, tries to kind of protect us and give us a framework to work within.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when we're all going through it, when we're going through our own hell, we say to ourselves, "But my God, why did I choose to come here? What's going on? What was I thinking? Did I fall
I
on my
know.
head? What happened?" And then you come out the other side and you say, that happened, and there was that guy, and then there was that job, and then there was this and that, and I kind of like the saying by Bashar, if you know the Chandler Bashar, and he
Yeah.
says, your physical mind is in the valley, but your higher mind is on the mountain. And what he means by that is that when your higher mind is on the mountain, you can actually look down into the valley and you can see all the twists and turns. You can see all the different paths and all the different things that are going on, and you know where you have to go. But because the physical mind is in the valley, we don't see it. So we're not able to see around the corners and it was, oh my God, what's going on? I'm going through hell. Help me out. But when you sort of come out, you're like, wow, this really had to happen this way, or this, I had to really have this abusive boyfriend, or I really had to have this abusive father, or go through drugs and all that, because I had to come out the other side. And when I'm sure you've noticed this before as well, is that a lot of people who are working in the spiritual field, or who are life coach, or who are channelers and all that stuff, we've all been through our substances. We've all been through our hells. We've all been through this and that. So whereas we're so quick to sort of put down people who, and I'm not advocating, I'm just saying that it's going through that type of thing that allows us to see the worst, but also to come out the other end and go through the light. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. It's really interesting because as you're saying that, you know, in the movement of transpersonal psychology, there is I don't know if you're familiar with the LSD experiments that were done
Yeah.
at Harvard. So all of that with Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert being done at Harvard, that was kind of like the beginning. I mean, Abraham Maslow and Anthony Sudich were in California, and they were, developed humanistic psychology, and they were having this own awakening in this third phase of psychology. But clear across the country, we had these experiments being done where we were looking into these different states of reality that people could slip into, where they would start to sense. And what would come out of those LSD experiments a lot of times where people would have that perspective of, I went through this horrible traumatic experience so that I could get to this place on the mountain, like you're saying, where I could look down and recognize what had happened and feel gratitude for it without
Exactly.
spiritually bypassing, because there's
Exactly.
definitely, we have to just kind of, it becomes the experience that we have this gratitude towards it. And so really LSD in the 60s, them going through the process of doing that really brought this awareness of how trauma really affects the individual as a rite of passage for the spiritual development of the individual. So I think what you're talking about is we don't need to do LSD to get there.
No.
I think those beginning pioneers of looking beyond what to do with psychology were looking towards LSD, saying, well, what's happening? How are we getting into these altered states of consciousness and having these profound experiences that are enlightening our being and allowing us to accept these traumatic experiences so that we can move forward in a way that is more in alignment with our true self. And so it's a really awesome part of the transpersonal psychology movement. It was just intertwined with
Yeah.
LSD. Yeah.
But you know what though? The Because when we're going through these changes, there's a change on a personal level, but there's also a group, a mass change that we're all going through, as a group. And what's interesting, the way I see it, especially in the '60s, is that the '60s was a turning point for the world. There was a lot going on in the '60s. You had like a civil rights movement, and you had people, the women's rights movement and all that, and people were starting to change slowly but surely. And we can probably talk more about it, but the LSD experience seems to be a time when a lot of people were doing LSD in the 60s. And that changed a lot of people. Now, it doesn't mean that people continued or did it all the time, but to have that LSD experience changes a person at a certain level. It has to. You see things from a whole different level. And especially now, for example, people doing a lot of plant medicine and working with ayahuasca. And so that's changing perception, that's changing consciousness. And when you have that change of consciousness at a mass level like you had at the 60s ushered us into the transpersonal psychology. I'm wondering if the transpersonal psychology would have even happened had people not been having the LSD experiences. I don't know. How do you feel?
Well, transpersonal psychology definitely in, just being at the school. When I went for my opening seminar into my master's program, we watched them talk about the LSD experiments and how all of that was a huge movement into this new awareness and this new potential of humanity. So we kind of had to really go through understanding how it all developed. So I think you're absolutely right. Looking beyond the ego, I think plant medicines and LSD pushed us through it.
Yeah.
And brought us into the awareness that we could learn how to let go, shed that off. And I think that movement, well, and it's coming back. I mean,
Yeah, it
we're
is
seeing
with ayahuasca and all that. Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely a big part of who we are. And I think you're right with the collective consciousness. It was awesome when we had this opening seminar and we were shown this information on LSD, and some of the people there, they were really nervous. They were like, why is this a part of what we're doing in transpersonal psychology? Why are we even learning about this? They had no interest in doing LSD or experiencing anything like that.
Yeah.
And I remember just kind of, feeling this information coming through me, like, it's awesome that they did it because now we don't have to.
Exactly.
And so it was beautiful. So it was in the collective.
Yeah.
It did awaken something inside of people. I mean, we've got the 100 monkey experience. I mean, this is just who we are.
Yeah.
We are of a collective mind, and we awaken together. We move through things together, and we've had a lot of proof of that. So
Yeah.
I definitely.
I have an interesting comment here from one of our viewers, Lemonade, and he said, sometimes we are the hero, and sometimes we are the one who need to be rescued. I feel it goes back and forth a lot. And I think that's a really, really interesting comment because, kind of going back to the idea of pulling weeds, sometimes we're, with the pendulum swings one way or the other, but we always sort of somehow try to find our way into the middle and into the balance, as it were,
Absolutely. What is beautiful about that is that kind of moves into the next slide.
Yeah.
When we talk about meeting the mentor. So on the hero's journey, meeting the mentor is when we kind of experience that rescue. And so transpersonal psychology had to experience meeting the mentor because all of those LSD experiments got shut down, and all of the data that they gathered from that got hidden underneath the rug. And so Stan Groff, he's kind of one of the biggest faces of transpersonal psychology. He was a doctor from Czechoslovakia, and he was a medical doctor and then went on to earn his PhD in medicine because he was really interested in moving beyond the old tradition of doing these electroshock therapies. I think I remember him saying he did like 10 to 15 of those a day while he was in medical school and then his first couple years of his practice. And so he was one of the first people that actually got to start to use LSD in a therapeutic environment. So in the 50s and 60s, Groff was working at the Psychiatric Research Institute in Prague, and they were treating trauma, psychosis, spiritual experiences, birth-related trauma. And then he came to the US in the 60s and he began working in Maryland. And they continued work with psychiatric research with LSD. and he had some wonderful, profound data that he collected. He was actually friends with Albert Hofmann, which was the Swiss chemist that developed LSD on accident.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, so Stan Grof is, you know, Albert Hofmann is known for saying that if I'm the father of LSD, Stan Grof is the godfather.
Okay.
So he kind of helped usher in the awareness of LSD, and he ended up meeting Maslow and Anthony Sudich later, and they all kind of came together. So he kind of rescued the movement in a way, and they all kind of came together and they started to work on this new form of psychology that they wanted to build to support the spiritual path, to support these transcendent states of consciousness that weren't really being taken as serious as they needed to be taken.
Yeah. So when we're looking at that, we are, and I noticed in the other slide, it said Harvard. Oh, there's something about Harvard, and so they were doing that study at Harvard as well. I don't
Well,
know.
they were doing, yeah, in 1960 to 63, there were the Harvard studies with Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert. They were heading the department. And so they did a lot of studies on psychology with, or on psilocybin with people. There was the Good Friday experiment where they studied religious experiences, and they worked with graduate students and ran experiments for, I think, 3 years. They also did a study in a prison. So they worked with prisoners to see if LSD could help rehabilitate them. It was a wonderful experience, but after 3 years, they got shut down. The I mean, this was just the beginning of the world of psychology, really trying to shut out, focusing on these higher states of consciousness, and they were just really trying to push it out.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it is what it is, and also the higher states of consciousness is also a bit of a, not even so much for people, but for the establishment. It scares them because it's something that they can't really I mean, you can technically quantify it, but you know what I mean. You cannot look at someone's experience on the other side and really have a bricks and mortar kind of to account for it. And I think that that's what it just scares a lot of people, especially people that have looked at doctors and other specialists who focus on being just in the dogma. And this kind of experience takes them out of the dogma. So they're saying, well, I don't know what to do then. If I can't follow the dogma, then what do I do? You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we see this throughout the whole transpersonal psychology movement. It was always a struggle to push through, even now. I mean, we're not really out of the woods yet. And we're growing, and you're starting to see some of these practices that we use in the world of transpersonal psychology in mainstream psychology now. So we're slowly integrating. So that's a beautiful thing, but it's really not viewed. I mean, you can't charge insurance for transpersonal psychology. So it's really not being accepted in medical.
Exactly.
Even still, you're right. Yeah.
So moving on to the next step in terms of like creating a journal and creating something that was a little bit more the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology. So I guess this was a journal that was created to launch this new movement, or
Yes. So when Stan Grof started to work with Anthony Sudich and Abraham Maslow, and there was others in the group, they started to work on forming transpersonal psychology. They first went through the stage of humanistic psychology development. So Abraham Maslow and Anthony Sudich developed that third form, which embraced the positive aspects of the individual in their treatment. So that's where we get positive psychology. And so there was a lot of beauty coming from that. But, even when they were developing humanistic psychology, they knew that they were going to have to consider these altered states of consciousness and these expanded waves of consciousness that people were experiencing. So they knew they weren't done. And so when they pulled Stan Groff in and they started to work with him and and even Richard Alpert and Timothy Leary, they were all kind of in and out of that group of people. That's when transpersonal psychology really formed. So they went through crossing the threshold, and they went through the transhumanistic, I think was the first term they used. They called it transhumanistic, but Stan Groff brought the transpersonal psychology, that word that stuck with them. And so, yeah, we moved into the development of that, which was 1969. And it was the same month that the Journal for Transpersonal Psychology was developed. We walked on the moon. So interesting when we're talking about the collective and what happens in a collective way. That's really what took place for that development. It was really wonderful.
Yeah, but you know, it's interesting that we're talking about going on the moon, because we're stepping into a new world, and going to transpersonal psychology is in a way stepping into a new world. You know, and that's what I was trying to say before, is that it's pushing us further into a different realm of understanding and consciousness, because the idea of now leaving our planet and going into another planetoid, moon, is it's a whole shift in our paradigm of what it means to be a human being on this planet,
I think so too. And I think the question that people have been asking themselves, I have this thought often about what happens when we ascend. It's like we're in our own hero's journey as a collective. We don't know yet what's going to happen once we get onto the moon and have more exploration. We're going to continue to expand our awareness into these, because now look how many people are aware, and now we're getting ready to go to the moon again.
Yeah.
We don't know what's going to happen. And so many people are starting to channel and connect to extraterrestrial. We have no idea.
Yeah.
It's very exciting.
Yeah, and especially when people talk about seeing structures on the moon, or having different beings on the moon and all that, people are becoming a lot more open to that, because like I said, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you would have been like tinfoil hat and woo-woo and totally crazy. And now people are like, it's maybe those pictures being blotted out by NASA are really trying to say something,
Yeah.
The moon is not what we think it is. So we are now at a point now where, and we touched upon it just a moment ago, about how academia is probably not comfortable with the idea of transpersonal psychology. So there's a point, so is this a point where we now go in and we look at how some of the tests, like if people were tested, if you found some allies in one area, but then you found enemies in other aspects of academia, what's the next step for transpersonal psychology in that respect?
Well, I think the testing has happened. I think we're just going through this movement. It's the same thing. I think we're slowly getting more traction, and more people are starting to embrace the idea of transpersonal psychology. But we still have a lot of work to do, and it really has to do with a lot of the people in the field of psychology that are very stuck in psychoanalysis and behaviorism and don't want to consider these other aspects of humanality. They really just want to diagnose and figure out how to control the symptoms. They really, I think, on their own personal level, are struggling on their own path of the hero's journey to go into the unseen world. A lot of them will even say, well, I need proof. And it's like, well, we do have a lot of proof we can show you, but it's like they have to see it to believe it. And there is a little bit of faith you have to take in the proof that we're showing you, because, we can show you proof for anything these days. So I think a lot of psychologists in the field that are a little more stubborn and want to stay in that traditional form, they don't want to lose that structure that they've been operating in because they've been successful at it and it's predictable. They have to go through their own hero's journey. So I think as the mass of us continues to awaken, it's only a matter of time.
Yeah, and I mean, I might go out on a limb here, but and I don't know, maybe I just sort of picked up something. But would you say that the academia concerning psychology was a lot more, how should I say, of a patriarchal masculine perspective, and that the transpersonal psychology is more of the feminine, the divine feminine, which is going to be a lot more open. And I don't, and I, I'm always so careful on the show because I don't want to sort of be like man bad, woman good. I don't want that, I don't want to do that.
Oh,
It's stupid. But what I'm trying to say is more from the divine feminine in terms of a global picture. It just seems to me that the idea of shifting and moving into this different aspects of psychology is more of as we're moving to the divine feminine in general, that we're moving away from the patriarchal masculine approach of, and you said they want to control these symptoms, they want to control, and it's the constant control that I find really sort of seems to resonate with more of that aspect. I don't know if you wanted to just comment on that.
absolutely. And I think we're going through, we swung the other way, I think in the 60s and 70s, and then everything became developed. And it's funny because I often say if transpersonal psychology were a woman, she would say, I don't have to be accepted to be because I'm intuitive. And I think the formation and we'll get into this in the slide in just a minute here, but the formation of all of these institutes that now support transpersonal psychology really embrace her. So I do look at transpersonal psychology as a woman. So you might have been tapping into
Yeah.
my thoughts on that too. But we needed that male aspect, right?
Yeah,
We've got
we do.
female.
Well, we need both.
We needed that original foundation, the understanding of it, the rigor of being able to even contemplate the idea of controlling something that felt so distorted or unwell within a person. But now I think there's this softness coming in where it's a soft expansion, which is beautiful. And that's really how transpersonal people that work with transpersonal psychology view the client. It's with this soft, expanded, safe space. That's why there's a lot of inquiry and a lot of questions being asked, because we're really trying to draw out the intuitive presence of the individual to reflect on their own experience and what has really happened to them, because that's in their own awareness of it. And that connection to the intuitive, that divine feminine inside of them will bring out that experience that will make it stick. It will just become who they are. You become transpersonal psychology.
Yeah. Now, we just want to look at some of the people here: Ken Wilber, Joseph Campbell, Jack Cornfield, Ralph Metzner. Did you want to talk about these people in particular, and how, just a quick run through as to how they, in your opinion, because you mentioned them in the slide, why they were important, how they were integral to the development here?
Each one of them brought their own, and this was the beauty of the movement. It brought people together that had been doing their own individualized study. Like Joseph Campbell, we know, studied mythology and found this pattern of the hero's journey throughout the ages. Some of his mythology is very, very old, and it's beautiful that the human being has always gone through this process of understanding itself and becoming, we've become self-actualized through this process. And he just saw the pattern and brought that forward. So some of these other people, it was the same thing. They studied the world of psychology until they finally started to recognize the importance of including more of the experiences of the individual in the diagnosis of them, in the recognition of why they might be experiencing the turmoil that they're in. So they started to incorporate the history of the individual and started to see people more as individuals and not as a pathology. So that was a really incredible. So when we talk about allies coming together in that stage 6, that was the biggest gift that could have come out of that, all these like-minded people in the world when there was no internet.
Yeah.
They were just hearing about each other, making phone calls, flying out to see one another, visiting a few times a year together so that they could bring their research together. And this is what happened.
Yeah. But
The
you know what?
result.
But you know what, though? I almost sort of miss those days when we didn't have the internet, because, I mean, it was much more exciting to be able to actually meet people face to face and to actually sit and share one on one. You know, I mean, look, don't get me wrong. I love the internet, and look, we have this technology here that we're able to speak with everybody. But at the same time, the idea of actually people coming together and just, talking about it, I think it's kind of interesting. I have an interesting comment here from Francesco di Vienna. He says here, let's empower more of our own team members on how to practice experimental psychology at our own personal level. And I think that's interesting. I think that that's interesting that we can empower ourselves, you know?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's great. And, I go back to the glory of questions and continuing to ask. I always say I'm always asking myself at least one question, and I'm always asking the universe at least one question, and oftentimes also the collective. So I leave questions out there about my life or about the collective awareness that I could have with other people in the field, whether I'm channeling that or whether everyone's channeling that or not. I always leave those questions out there so that those answers can come to me, because I agree. It's important to continuously experiment with that, and what our connection is to all of these realms of consciousness that we're always interacting with.
Yeah. So, in terms of, moving forward, and so let's say we're at this point, we're now in the 70s, and when we're looking at the deeper work and the integration of the different types of steady, if we look at the next slide, maybe we can sort of go over some of the, approach to the innermost cave. What does that mean, the innermost cave?
So this part of the hero's journey is where the real work gets, kind of heavy. If we take a look at this from the individual standpoint and not the transpersonal standpoint, this is when we have to take the knowledge that we have come in contact with, and we have to figure out how to integrate that. So for many of us that have been awakening on our spiritual path for a long time, we can relate to some of the examples. So we meditate, we do yoga, maybe we're embodying shamanic practices. Some of us come in contact with mystical states, and we start to engage with the shadow here. We do that inner child work, or this is also when people start to recognize that we need to consider trauma as the catalyst to address spiritual emergencies. And this is where we address the ego death, and the dark night of the soul comes into this part of the stage. So when we look at this from transpersonal psychology and what psychology has gone through on its hero's journey, this is when we look at the leaders of the movement and how brave they were and how they had to engage with the shadow of the movement. So questions here for them would be, why didn't mainstream psychology want to embrace this new avenue of knowledge that had the potential to create so much support? And we don't know if that was money or greed or ego or all of them, probably. But, many of the people involved in the transpersonal psychology movement had to let go of their stable jobs, and they had to go out on a limb to follow the path that they so deeply believed in. And they were the real pioneers. So I think that is inspirational for me in how I work with clients and even myself, to always just remember that part of it. We have to integrate these aspects into our life so we can really become the next, become self-actualized. And they inspire me to do that, because, that was really hard for some of them. When you listen to some of those people in the 70s talk about how they were getting outed by their communities, and some of their colleagues that they had been working with for decades were starting to, turn their cheek.
Wow. And when we look at, the interesting part there is the death of the ego. Now, I understand the words, but what does it mean, really, the death of the ego? How does that represent itself?
Well, we look at all of these labels, and we've touched on it a little bit when we talk about, these expectations that we put on ourselves. When someone's struggling with, let's say, ADHD, let's go back to that example. I have ADHD, so I kind of,
Yeah, so do
not
I.
that I think,
We all do.
I think
A lot of us do.
yeah, and it's very common in
Yeah.
in the mystical fields,
It
for
is.
sure.
A lot of people have that, oddly enough. Yeah.
Yeah. So if we look at that and we start to kind of integrate how that has affected us, we went through the process of not wanting to change course or not wanting to move into the next stage because we committed to that. We were going to follow it this time, no matter what. We have to be brave, and we have to decide that we're going to make that choice to move ahead, whether or not, and that's hard for the ego to do that. We committed, or we have this label. We're this, when we look at these pioneers in this field, I'm a psychologist. This is my successful practice. This is how I've always done it. Well, now I have to shut off my ego because my ego wants to hold up that persona. But there's part of me recognizing that there is more to the human psyche, and I have to look at it and decide if I can embrace those other aspects of the human being and look at psychology and move into this new place of where I can help people in this whole expanded new way. And you really have to shut off your ego, I think, just for the everyday person, in a lot of things that we decide that we have to do and that we have to shed that off and say, I know that I've been that, or I know that I decided to do this, but now I'm going to, because I feel that it's right, or I feel I want to make this change or explore this new avenue, I'm going to let go of that.
Yeah.
And I'm going to take that leap.
Yeah, you have to step up, as they say, and just and be there. I have an interesting, a very excellent comment actually, again from Francesco Di Vienna. He says the basis has to be our ability to grasp reality and examine our skills in the thought development experience on a daily basis. I find that kind of interesting, very profound, Francesco. You should be hosting the show. Very profound.
I love that.
Yeah, I know, very much so. So now we're at a point where, and this is what often happens, is, you sometimes look at, for example, like a music group, let's say look at the Beatles or something like that, and they started off as one big unit, and then over time the group sort of starts to splinter a bit, and then you have some people going in one direction, another, splintering here and there. Is that what happened with the transpersonal psychology movement? Like, did you have a situation where you have like internal fragmentation and you have like tensions between different factions of the transpersonal psychology? Did it end up growing into different sections and moving on? What was happening, I guess, by the 70s at this point?
Well, in the world of psychology, so in stage 8, it's the ordeal, right? So then there was this suppression of psychedelic research. So they took away the research and didn't want to look at the data really connected to it. And so that was it. The institutional support that was being given to the LSD movement had been pulled away. And in hindsight, we can see now that this was a critical step that had to happen. And but more tension grew in academic settings because of the ban. I think there were probably a lot of people that were like, see, we told you this wasn't a good avenue. Let's come back and ground ourselves back into psychoanalysis and behaviorism. And it was really a struggle. I think it, had its one step forward and one step back. And I think this ordeal made it really tricky for people in the field to kind of push on.
Okay. Well, you know what, though? I think at some level we definitely have grown, though.
Yeah.
And we're so after the 70s, and the 70s was still sort of still a stepping point off from the 60s. And I mean, the 60s and 70s are a very, very different time. But let's say, for example, looking at the 80s, which was a very different time from the 60s and 70s. I mean, the 80s was a whole other departure, not only in terms of like what was happening politically, but also socially, and women's, women had a very different role to play in society and all that. What was happening at this point? Like, where are we now in the 80s?
Well, I think in the 80s is when, it's interesting though, because in the world of transpersonal psychology in the 80s, I mean, this is when we really look at what happened in the field as far as people continuing to just kind of push forward, even though LSD was illegal at this time, and all of this stuff was being really being pushed into fruition. So we're going to recognize these states of consciousness without the LSD and take that research, even though it's been considered negative and bad, and we were supposed to burn it all. The transpersonal movement moved on, and they developed these facilities. I mean, so this was the reward part.
Yeah.
This is why it had to happen. So we have these beautiful facilities. Sophia University, I think, well, it's been around since the 70s. And a lot of these schools, and this is just a couple of them right here. We have Naropa and Boulder.
Yep.
This is what the late 70s and 80s brought us.
Okay.
All of these institutions, and there's more all across the country, but these are actually accredited schools that you can go to and get a transpersonal education and learn how to really integrate that into the world of psychology. So I would say the loss of the LSD research or the LSD movement and that ban was such an important piece to the transpersonal psychology movement, because it really made people try to explore these aspects without the drug. And that data continued.
Okay, that's great. So when we're looking now, so we're getting into maybe the 80s and 90s here, and I'm sensing that we've gone to a certain direction, and now we're sort of making the road back. What's happening at that point?
Yeah, stage 10 is the road back. So all of these facilities really started to gather up curriculums. They started to figure out how to teach people. Stan and Christina Groff, this was awesome because I can't remember what year exactly, they developed holotropic breath work. So they were still trying to help people get into the healing states that LSD brought forward without having to use LSD. So they allowed people to go in and experience this inner work through a breathing technique.
Okay.
And now we know there are many forms of breath work created that elicit this psychedelic-like state, which causes us to release the trauma from the body. And these methods have been studied a lot. So there's a lot of great research you can find. And I will say, I've done a lot of psychedelics in my life. I have. And I've done breath work. And although they might not be exactly the same, they are both very powerful healing methods.
Okay.
I began working as an NLP life coach after I received my bachelor's degree in counseling psychology. And trauma ended up becoming my specialty before I even knew what transpersonal psychology was. And I began to notice patterns in how people experience the release of trauma from their bodies as they align with their spiritual gifts. So this is a very natural unfoldment that happens. And I think that this is what really started to take place in the 80s and 90s.
Okay, that's great. And so we are at the 90s now, we're moving to the 2000s. And would you say that there is, I mean, because now at this point we've sort of moved on from the psychedelics and moved on to a lot of different things. But would you say that there's some sort of revival of the psychedelics at some level? Like, is there are people, because at this point it's sort of grown, it's shifted in many different ways. Are there certain aspects that are now sort of coming back into review or back into popularity regarding this field of study?
I think so. I think as humanity continues to evolve, we go in waves. And I think there were waves of LSD, that movement of psychedelics in the psyche of humanity. I think there was a first wave that had to kind of happen. And indigenous people would probably laugh at me saying that was a first wave because they used plant medicines throughout time, really. But in mainstream, I would say there was this wave. And I think we're now getting ready to go through this second wave. And we're doing it a little more intelligently. We're because we know so much more now. We're microdosing. We're using, I mean, there are hospitals starting to use microdosing and plant medicines.
Yeah, could you, sorry, I didn't mean to sort of jump in there, but can you talk, because there's a lot of talk about microdosing, and we're going to go into different aspects of to sort of finish off the presentation, to sort of go through each one. But microdosing, I know what the word is, but what is microdosing exactly? Can you just sort of give us a very, very clear, concise idea of what exactly is microdosing?
Sure. So microdosing is kind of like homeopathy. That's kind of how I view it.
Okay.
But it's taking, let's say LSD was this much. It's taking a very tiny, tiny little portion of that and giving it to the individual at a steady pace over time. So maybe every other day or a couple days on, couple days off. Different doctors do it different, and it depends on what you're microdosing. So there's all kinds of things. Ketamine's being used in hospitals. Psilocybin's being used. There's really a very large ibogaine. There's a large body of research being done in a lot of different hospitals. So it's just using a tiny, tiny little amount. And it's interesting because I've done ayahuasca, I've done a lot of different psychedelics over my lifetime. And I've also microdosed because I really wanted to feel the experience of that. And with every plant medicine or every LSD experience, psilocybin, whatever you're doing, there is always the importance of the intention. So even when you're microdosing, it's important that the doctor always sets it up this way. You're really setting an intention to let go of PTSD or the traumatic experience and to integrate that into your awareness in a way that helps support you into the life that you really want. So you take this tiny little amount, and over time, you can have a similar experience that you would have if you took it all at once.
Okay, I see.
So we're just,
Yeah, and so with that in mind, would you say that transpersonal psychology it helps the individual? And thank you for that explanation about microdosing. But now, moving forward, do you feel that this could also help to heal the collective? Can transpersonal psychology help to heal the collective? And what does that look like exactly?
Well, I would say, like, just to kind of go over this last slide here. So stage 12 in the hero's journey is returning with the elixir. And so transpersonal psychology is now expanding into all branches of psychology. We're seeing EMDR, and we're seeing all different kinds of like tapping and metaphysical approaches to the human body for treatment. And we're having great success, and people come up with modalities. I feel like something's being born every day. It's just amazing. So as we become more and more aware of the need to self-actualize, I am hoping one day we will see this branch of psychology being used in schools with children.
Wouldn't that be nice,
Yeah, just using the self-actualization. It's seen as this gateway to even higher states of being. So if you remember that pyramid, really that self-actualization, it really creates a pyramid on top for us to experience the rest of the layers that we have the capacity to experience. And so once we become self-actualized, we really go through an even a grander expansion. And this is where we see our spiritual gifts develop. This is where we, some of these children are even being born now without losing their memory of past lives and where they've come from. And so this is really the framework for the fifth dimension. And so it's beautiful
Yeah.
watching this unfoldment take
Yeah,
place.
really. No, it is beautiful because, and I want to sort of, I mean, we're moving forward in time and future, but there's a part of me that sort of seems to feel that a lot of these different modalities were definitely something that we experienced in older ancient civilizations like in Atlantis, and that this would have been seen as very common. Like, for example, we hear things about how in ancient Egypt they used sound therapy. They used, different aspects of sound therapy in order to heal the body, and they were using technologies that we can't even begin to imagine, because in Atlantis and also in ancient Egypt, these were the types of healing modalities that were there a long time ago, and we're just now rediscovering them. Would you say that this is something that we're in a process of rediscovering and maybe taking to the next level? Because now we're like you said, children are being born with these gifts, or the crystal children are being born already sort of, plugged in, as it were.
I think it's amazing. Absolutely. I think, what brought me to the world of transpersonal psychology was trying to understand more of what I was seeing with people that we were treating. So I really wanted to understand. I could see, so much. I was doing mediumship work, and I had the capacity to see into other realms. And so I really wanted an explanation. I wanted to know how to bring that awareness into my own life, but then it just started expanding. And I was really fortunate to be in a community where for about 6 years I was at a spiritualist church, and I was volunteering a couple days a week, and I was working with all these other healers, and all of these healers that would come in from out of town and come work with us. And it was like it was heaven, really, being in that environment, because so many people were awakening to more and more of what they couldn't see before. And it was becoming, because we were held in such a sacred space, it was becoming normal to be able to, for example, in that environment, it felt like everybody could kind of read your mind a little bit. And that just became a normal part of what we got used to. When you went to volunteer, you were at the church there for whatever, and you saw other people. It was like we were in this collective knowing together. And it wasn't new, it was old. It felt as though we were remembering how to communicate with one another without language. And we found ourselves experiencing, a lot of people talk about this in conscious communities. So it definitely happens all over, all over the world. But you do start to tap into the recognition, even in dreams. Sometimes people would come to that chapel with the experience of remembering someone that was there, that was a healer, that was actually that volunteered there. And they would say, you came to me in my dream and you got me and you told me where to go. And the next day I got online and I looked for this chapel and I found it. And it was almost as if this technology, it felt like a technology, because it was like, how did that happen? We couldn't figure it out. It was just this beautiful process of awareness that we were all experiencing. But more and more people are experiencing phenomena like this, and it's becoming normal. And I think it's because I think it's easy when you're open to accept it and allow it to continue to unfold, because it's going to turn into something else because it's so familiar.
Yeah.
And it does come, it's channeled information, or it's the channeled ability, something we don't even have to process the understanding of before we experience it, because our body is really just remembering how to do it.
Yeah. And it's interesting, and I'm glad you brought that up, because also I've been hearing people talking about how we are shifting to the point where we're going to be able to be telepathic. And that seems that is how we were back in Atlantis and Lemuria, is that we had the ability to be telepathic long before we had language. And I mean, that's a whole other segue. But I mean, it seems that this is sort of where we're like, again, we're coming back to that ability to be telepathic. And when you talk about your experiences of being with these people, I get, because I get impressions as well. And what I'm getting is that there's a vibration and you're all sort of coming together and you're vibrating. And so you're all able to, at this point, almost you know, speak at the higher level, especially if you're having dreams. You're able to speak and to communicate outside of the 3D realm. You know, it's
Yeah, I love that. You know, Spirit said years ago, I got this really beautiful message, and they said, my spirit guide said, you really need to embrace the idea of walking through life as if everyone can read your mind. And I thought that sounded just crazy, but I wondered why. So, of course, I asked this question to the universe, and they said, we are coming back into a point in humanity where we are going to be operating telepathically. But the key to that is being open enough and being able to control the mind enough and being accepting enough to allow other people to read your mind. And this is really when we were kind of talking about, you know, not trying to be perfect, but trying to be open. And I think meditation helps us with that, because we let go of thoughts that aren't serving us. We learn how to let go of thoughts through meditation. So it is a beautiful practice for many reasons. But I do think you're right. There's this technology that's unraveling and unfolding when we create these spaces and these institutions, and even just in some communities. I mean, I've been to some really awesome towns where people have a lovely spiritual community, and this phenomena starts to happen because it's just the natural next step of our evolution.
yeah. And would you say that, and along that path of being telepathic, would you say, and now we're sort of going into more of the galactics, is this allow us to have the ability to connect with higher beings at a galactic level, like, you know, different extraterrestrial beings? A lot of people are talking about being able to communicate with, you know, as there's starseeds, like with Arcturus and different channeling and all that, because it just seems that that's where we're sort of headed, because we're going to be having a connection with our galactic cousins at, you know, at a certain date, and it seems that we are preparing ourselves to be able to communicate at that level. You know, I'm not sure how you feel about that.
Well, it's an interesting. It makes me think of really the purpose of transpersonal psychology and why it was really it had to be birthed into our collective, and it had to become present, because, you know, if we think about discernment as we continue this process of opening up and gathering the capability of being able to connect to these higher dimensions and these extraterrestrial beings that are out there, we really need the discernment, which means that we have to be willing to go through the hero's journey and look with the eyes of transpersonal psychology to really help us shed off the shadow enough to vibrate in that frequency enough to do all of that. I don't want to say safely, but in a natural, organic way. So really, transpersonal psychology, I think, it can be looked at sometimes as a form of discernment. It sets you up to be able to discern what you're connecting to in a way that is natural to the human body, that is, you know, heart-centered, a heart-centered desire, where we've shed off the ego desire to connect to all of that, because there is a science to that. But we want to do it experientially with all of our being. We want to be able to connect to that.
Yeah. And I have another interesting, you know, Francesco, you're on fire tonight, because he's talking about how language, he was making a comment about language, saying language is managed confusion, producing clarity of mind. And if we're looking at the idea of connecting with galactic beings, most galactic beings talk, through when people talk about their experience with the different extraterrestrial beings, they always say that it's always been done telepathically. They've never had somebody sort of open their mouth and say, ah, ah. It's always been a telepathic sort of communication. So that seems to be something that is from people who have worked with different beings, saying that that is how it works in the galaxy. And that's the reason why you don't need languages, because when it's telepathic, you don't need to speak. Okay, well, if you speak French and you don't speak German, then you're already cut off right there. And that doesn't seem to be an issue with that. But I have here, he says also, can we talk about how we can create a better environment for the mind and body integration on an individual level? Would you like to sort of comment on that?
Well, I think when we look at the mind and body, we have to consider the vibration of consumption. Mm-hmm. And so, and not just in food, I mean, food quality, air quality, water quality, all of that can be considered, especially when we're thinking about the pineal gland and taking care of our organs. And, we have to take care of the temple, so we can view it through that. But even what we're consuming vibrationally all day long. Sometimes I've had people log what they consume during the day. And that's really everything that we consume. So everything that we interact with with our senses, that's the rate of consumption. So everything that we're viewing or watching or interacting with, as far as social media and television and people, and all of that is really something that on an energetic level we consume. So sometimes it's important for people to really log their experiences of consumption throughout the day, so they can kind of see what it is that's making them feel, whenever they're having experiences of not feeling, the high. What is it that is creating that? Is that something we can manage? Is that something we can dwindle down to a certain time? I like to put things into compartments sometimes. So maybe move some of the apps off of our phone that we like to engage with. It kind of distracts us. Move it a few pages back on our phone so we don't have easy access to it. And, just even conversations with people. You don't know how many people will get in a pattern of maybe talking to someone on their way home from work, and they'll start to recognize, every time I get off the phone with that person, I don't feel good. So they start to maybe watch the tone of the conversation, start to shift the conversation in a more positive direction, maybe minimize the time, or maybe even talk to that person about maybe what the conversation needs to be about. We consume things all day long, and we really need to pay attention to what we're consuming and start to kind of figure out how to detox some of those things that are a little lower in vibration out of our life, so we can make room then for things that are a more positive vibration. So this is just even walking around outside or changing a routine. I talk often about changing just the routine of your day, maybe taking a different route to work so that you're more aware and you're not just following along a pattern of thoughts and direction, because we do that after we do things in a pattern for so long. So it's really just about starting to shift our awareness of consumption.
Yeah, and so I'm interested to know, we've talked a little bit about some of the skills that you have and some of the experiences that you've had. Can you give us a little bit more of a bit of a list of sort of the things that are considered, transpersonal psychology? So you talked about channeling, you talked about microdosing. Sort of just give us maybe just sort of a rundown so people know exactly what is under the umbrella of transpersonal psychology.
I mean, I would say anything that is creating more awareness of self is really under that umbrella. So like I said, I love to ask questions to myself. When someone sits across from me, I ask questions like, what are the themes of this individual's life? How does this person view the themes of their life? What does this person wish to accomplish in this lifetime? And how can we use this person's natural rhythms to accomplish that? So really it's about asking and inquiring more to be revealed about ourselves, about other people in our lives, so that we come to more of an awareness. It's an expanded awareness. So things that transpersonal psychologists or people that work in the field would recommend to clients would be like meditation is usually a number one, stillness, becoming aware of our senses more. So there's all kinds of sensory practices we can use. Like you hear people talk about gratitude work when you're feeling low in vibration, just looking around you, talking about how and why you're grateful for things that are in your surroundings, that are in your life, characteristics that you have, people that embrace you, your children, what it's like to be a mother or an accountant or whatever it is that labels that you engage with. How are you experiencing them? What gifts do you give to other people? How can you be of service to the world? Yoga is a wonderful way, ecstatic dance, qigong, different ways to learn how to move energy through the body, and then inquiry into that, how that made you feel, what you experienced because of that. It's really, transpersonal psychology is about peeling down the layers of what is really going on behind the scenes.
Okay.
And so that's really my biggest piece of advice for people, exploration.
Okay, great. And I'm curious, what are some of the cooler experiences that you've had? I guess because you talked about being a channeler, you talked about different things. What are some of the cool experiences that you've had that you're like, wow, this really sort of moved you to the next level, as it were?
Yeah, so I have a couple, and I'm actually going to share two that I have that I experienced while I was in my master's program and while I was taking certain classes.
Okay.
So there was this one class called Ways of Knowing, and I was taking this class, and I was getting ready to have a Reiki share. So I've been doing Reiki for a long time, and I remember there was a lot of people coming to this one in particular. And so I was setting up all the tables all around my house, and I was pouring tea. And I remember taking the hot water, and I was pouring it into the glass. So I was holding my hand like this, and the water splashed outside of the glass onto my hand. And I remember in that moment, my one of my spirit guides said, look at me. So I had to focus my attention on him. And he said, breathe. And I remember the way he said, breathe to me. I was breathing in and out so deeply that I was releasing it felt like I was releasing any tension out of my body. I forgot about my hand, and I was forgetting about any tension that I had in my body. And I was just following him along in this flow of breathing in and out. And then I remembered, wait a minute, didn't I just burn my hand? And I went to feel my hand, and I couldn't feel the burn in my hand. And then I thought maybe it was the right hand. And so then I went to feel my right hand, and I felt a little bit. It's almost as if I felt the burn move from my left hand into my right hand, but it wasn't in my left hand. It was a really weird sensation. And so then I came out of it, and I had no burn on my left hand that the water actually hit. And I had a tiny little red mark of a burn on my right hand.
Oh.
And I remember being so blown away. I got into class, and I emailed my professor right away. And I was like, look, I had this really incredible experience of healing. What was this? And he basically asked me questions that made me remember that this is an ability. When we say we can heal ourselves, and I've seen miraculous healings, I have seen wild and amazing stories of spontaneous healings, of healings that happen in a short period of time. I've just been in a really good company, and I've worked with really great healers, and we've just learned some really great skills. But that was really awesome. And I ended up sharing it in a classroom. He wanted me to share it with the other students. And not long after that, someone else had a very similar experience with falling down on concrete and scraping their hands and not having any scrape marks on her hands. And I remember just, it was such a wild experience. And I remember being really grateful for the understanding that humanity has the capability to do far more than we realize.
So, just wanted to sort of let people know a little bit more just before we're sort of closing up here. I wanted to just show them the last slide that we have here, and it is the School of SOLA, School of Learning Awareness, and it has
Yes.
your website there. Did you want to tell us a little bit more about that? The SOLA Spiritual Development .com. You want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah, you can visit my website. Currently am doing, I do mediumship. I don't know that I'll ever not do mediumship. I love it. But I do Akashic record readings. So you'll find an explanation of the Akashic records on there. And I think transpersonal psychology, once I started to embrace transpersonal psychology into my world of mediumship, I started to naturally kind of see the spiritual path that people were working within and where they were on their path and what they were going through and their ancestors. And all of that experience became a part of the work that I do. So Akashic Records reading, it's a wonderful, I really love working with people in that way. It gives them a lot of great information and support in moving forward in their own spiritual path. I also do healing work. I don't know that I'll ever stop doing that either. It evolves into more and more every year. I feel like I go through more of a development in energy work. So I do energy transmissions, and those really feel like downloads into the body. So they kind of work through me. Sometimes I go into trance and sometimes I don't. It's really what the individual needs. So whatever's supposed to come forward, I allow it to come forward to support the individual. And I love the work that I do. So it's the School of Learning Awareness. I think eventually I'll start teaching again more on there. But right now I love my work. I'm very grateful.
Okay, great. Wow. And so you talk about getting in touch with your spirit guides. And
Mhm.
I know we talked about it very briefly about how, humanity is changing and we're moving forward. What do your spirit guides tell you about? And I mean, I know we're talking about transpersonal psychology, but transpersonal psychology is based on all these different modalities. And so, what are your spirit guides telling you about the future of humanity, if they are? I mean, I don't know if you specifically asked that question, but where do you see with your experience in both as a healer and also working, from the scientific psychological point of view, where is the humanity of mankind headed? Because a lot of people have been talking, I know I've been bringing it up on the show, but how 2025 to 2026, 27 are going to be very, very important years where
Yes.
we're going to have a very, very big shift in humanity. I don't know if your spirit guides have mentioned anything to you, if you have any kind of tidbits of information you want to sort of share with us. Is there anything
Sure.
there?
I would say an overall theme that I'm seeing is, and I think you talked on this a little bit earlier, a lot of people are coming online. So I do feel like that there is this split happening. And I feel like there's definitely a split, and some people are going to go one way and some people are going to go another way. Not to say that either is better, but it's just what's happening natural and it's where people are in their journey. And I do feel like the people that are coming online now are coming online in a really big way. And I feel like the guidance that transpersonal psychology has really inspired for people to receive, I think people are reaching out. They're looking for communities, they're asking for help because they're starting to feel this split happening, not just within themselves, but they're starting to feel it in the collective. So it feels like a bigger deal. And it is. We're going through this age where there's going to be a split. I see the earth splitting.
Yeah.
I really feel like we're about to break into two. And I feel like some of what we have known is going to be left behind. And what we are moving into, it's that leap of faith. So when we're really talking about transpersonal psychology, having this leap of faith and having to go into this space where it's not predictable and it's not known, really the people that are moving into this stage are embracing this because we are about to move into this stage where we don't know the capabilities that we're going to have and what it's going to be like there. But our intuition and our sense of self has gotten so strong that we are willing to go no matter what. Mm-hmm. And I think that is where I see the next 2000 or 2025, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah.
I see that's where we're going by 2030. That split is going to be so pronounced, and we really don't know what we're in for. And I think that's the biggest excitement that we should be looking at right now.
Yeah, and I just sort of, I know maybe sometimes I take more of the galactic route, but I think that definitely by 2030 we'll definitely have had, contact, and it's going to have to change our paradigm, because kind of like what we're talking about with the transpersonal psychology is that there was a certain way of thinking, up until, let's say, maybe the 1960s, and then the 1960s with everybody experimenting with LSD and different types of medicine, people's paradigms were changing. People were shifting, and I think that this is also a big shift that's coming as well. So there's that happening on that front, and we are going to have to engage with one another and engage with the galactics and engage with the planet at a different level. And I actually wanted to sort of, I forgot, we're always sort of looking out. But in terms of looking in and looking, for example, like I hear people talking about how we're going to be able to have the ability to connect with nature, to be able to talk with trees and animals and different types of the actual nature, and actually talk with, blades of grass, and we can have this connection. I forgot to ask that, but it sort of came back to me. Is that a part of the in a sense, transpersonal psychology, would you say?
Well, the other example that I would have given you earlier when you asked about, I forget how you worded it, significant things happening. When I was taking an eco psychology course, I actually had this experience where I drove past my rose bushes in my front yard, and I could hear them kind of cheering.
Oh.
And I couldn't believe it, but then it just kept happening. And it probably wasn't long after that where I recorded my son and I. He was about 8 or 9 at the time. We actually recorded a fairy bouncing around my rose bush. And I have like 2 minutes of this video of this little orb, and it was this little fairy bouncing around the bush. I've actually seen a fairy before too. And so I think if I'm having this experience, that means so many other people are having experience. And that means that it's because we're capable of having that experience. So absolutely 100%. I've seen, and I've heard a lot of stories over the years of people having these experiences, but we talk about our totem animals and how we experience that connection through the body and through our chakra system. But I would say the same thing for plants. I mean, even just using kinesiology to hold up something to your heart to see if you move forward or backward can inform you. Your body can inform you of whether or not you should ingest that. And that ability right there is going to move into technology that we probably can't even comprehend yet.
Exactly. But I mean, the idea, and it's funny you should bring that up about the idea of the fairies, is because what I'm hearing is that also as our abilities come online, we're going to be able to see things. We're going to open up and see fairies and see different types of animals and spirits and different types of beings from different, dimensions and different areas that we don't usually see, because the walls are so thick. But it seems that the veil is going to be get much, much, much thinner, and that we'll be able to see that. Before we were like, no, that's not real. But then seeing fairies sounds like kind of silly, but to some people, but it really is there because they're a different type of being. They're a being that is at a different level, and they're smaller, but they're still living beings. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Kids talk about seeing fairies and gnomes and elementals all the time. So 100%, I think that this is just part of our awareness of, and you can tell sometimes, my teacher always called it a dispensation when there would be an energy release from the cosmos. Different people call it different things now. Sometimes we experience them as downloads, and people have the same download of information on opposite sides of the planet. We'll just feel this energetic shift. And I think during those times, we start to experience a little bit of the lifting of the veil as we allow that energy to affect our cells. So if we're open to that, we can allow that download to come into our cells and inform us intuitively and sometimes physically of what is around us. And so we do have those experiences more during those times.
Absolutely. Well, I just wanted to say this has been an exceptionally interesting presentation we've had tonight. And I just wanted to remind people again that they can reach Elisha Mancini Caster on her website. I'm just putting it up there again. And people can sort of take that information. I'll also put that down in the links as well, so that people can see that. And I just wanted to say thank you so much, Elisha, for coming in and for speaking with us. It has been absolutely interesting. And I think that it's speaking to the new humanity that is coming on the planet. And even though it starts off as sort of like a psychology and science and all that, and there's nothing wrong with science, we still have to have sort of a foundation, but that we are using that as a point to leap off and to move into higher realms of being. So I just want to say thank you, Elisha, for coming in and speaking with us about that. And guys, if you have any questions that you'd like to pass on, I guess people can reach you at your email address, right? And they can sort of send you questions if they have any questions. So
absolutely.
Yeah. And they can check out your courses and check out some of what's happening on your channel as well. So I'll put those links down below once we finish recording, but I just showed you the website as well. So I want to just say thank you to everybody. Check out what Elisha's working on, and we're hoping to have Elisha come back again. We're going to have her come back again. I think we're going to be doing Akashic Records, I think, the next time we speak. So I want to say thank you again, Elisha, for coming to be with us, and thank you for everything and all your experiences, and we look forward to seeing you again. And I want to say thank you to everybody. As always, guys, if you're enjoying the content that we're bringing you, please like and subscribe. It really helps us. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe. We have a lot of content coming up, and you don't want to miss out on anything that we're doing. I know sometimes I get emails, people saying, oh, I missed it. Oh, well, you don't want to miss it. Subscribe. There you go. Basta. So, so please subscribe. And hit that button below, and we look forward to seeing you in the next. Actually, we're coming back on Saturday, and we're going to be meeting with Garrett Lang to talk about 5 tips on how to live a better life. So I hope to see you there on Saturday for another weekend edition. And thank you again, Miss for Elisha, for coming to be with us, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video. All right.
Take care, Crystal. Everybody. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Thank you for being with us. We look forward to seeing you again.
Oh, I loved it.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
I love it. I had a great time.